Voting in elections. This is the rules of the game. This is kind of the meat of the whole system, because who gets elected is really determined by the rules that we set up. And right from the very beginning, determining the winners of our elections is predicated on being able to understand those rules. So we want to start with that. The Republican and Democratic Party do not control this country because we love them. They control the country because they control the rules of the game. They control the state legislatures that set the rules for elections. They control the Secretary of State's offices that control the rules for elections. They control who gets to vote. They control, when voter rolls are purged. They control, the essential markers to the two-party system that allows them to stay in power and really hurts everyone else. When we draw the districts, often the election is over. When you look at redistricting and gerrymandering, that in itself, drawing the lines that determine the winners, the game's over. You look at this district, Assembly District number 48. 74% of the people who live in that district are Democrats, 12% are declined to state, and 9% are Republicans. Well, without knowing anything about who the candidates are, without knowing anything about voter turnout, without knowing anything about anything besides this data, you can accurately choose who's going to win the election every time. A Democrat is going to win this election. A Democrat is going to win this election whether they're a good Democrat or a bad Democrat. A Democrat is going to win this election whether or not they're corrupt. A Democrat is going to win this election whether or not they are dead. And I kid you not, dead Democrats have won in districts much like this. If it was an overwhelmingly Republican district, we would know who the winner of this district is. Districts that are drawn to include Republicans or Democrats to such a degree have already sacrificed that election. We already know the outcome. We don't need to actually have voters participate. We know the outcome. And that's right from the very start a corrupting influence on our democracy. But it's completely legal. It's completely allowed. But it is allowing the legislators to choose their voters rather than the voters to choose their representatives. These are called single-member districts. When we're talking about safe seats, single-member districts are drawn to give a substantial advantage to one political party. Now, we're not talking about statewide offices, governor or senator. Those are voted on statewide. But there are 53 seats for the House of Representatives in the state of California. So we take the entire state and we divide it. This is a map for the California Senate. There are 40 seats. So this is district number 1, and this is district number 2, and so on. Los Angeles has such tiny districts, and the Bay Area has such tiny districts that they're separate. But you see all the way down the state to District 40. So we draw these districts. We draw different districts for the House of Representatives. The California Assembly is actually really similar because we have 80 seats. So number 1 is just divided in half by population, and there's 2 seats in that district for the Assembly. But we draw these districts, and how those districts get drawn is a very political, often partisan process. California has made it a little bit better, but still we have incredibly safe seats where you really don't have to have an election to know the outcome. So we'll come back to redistricting and gerrymandering later. Let's talk about who votes, and a little bit about them. So in California, party registration by age. So these are 18 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 35, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and over 65. And you can see these are the Republicans, these are the Democrats, and this yellow area are decline to state. So there's a couple of things I want to point out. First of all, the older you are, the more likely you are to belong to a political party in California. Some of that is traditional, and some of that is because the rules have changed. So one of the reasons that so many young people belong to no political party is because they don't like political parties. But honestly, nobody likes political parties all that much. A lot of people don't like their political party, even though they belong to it, because the political parties don't match. They don't match our ideologies. They disagree with us on certain things. If you are a member of the Republican Party because you want lower tax cuts and, fiscal responsibility, you may not like the Republican Party's stance on social issues and allowing Christianity to have such an outsized amount of power on your politics about abortion, about same-sex marriage. You may not care about those things, but you're Republican because of fiscal issues. Same thing for the Democrats. You may be a Democrat because of certain issues and disagree with their position on other issues. So there's a lot of people who disagree with their party. The reason that more young people belong to no political party are decline to state is because the rules have changed. When seniors in California registered to vote, you weren't allowed to be declined to state. There was no option for that. So these 11% are people who have re-registered to vote in that category. But now the rules allow you to not just register as declined to state, but also to vote in every election. We used to have closed primaries, and in closed primaries, you have to belong to a political party to vote in the primary election for your political party's candidates. Now we have top two primary, and it doesn't matter what party, if any, you belong to, you can vote. So there's incentive, there's no punishment for not belonging to a political party, and that has meant that a third of new voters have done so. Often national media will look at this and say, oh, young people don't like political parties. Well, young people are just registering. They have no penalty for not belonging to a political party, so they don't. Who's likely to vote? I showed you this on the first day of class. 18 to 24-year-olds have very low voter turnout, less than a quarter, all the way up in age to 80% for seniors. So that's a huge factor, and our politicians certainly react to that. They campaign to seniors. They talk to seniors a lot. There's not a lot of campaigning to young people about young people's issues. I remember watching a presidential debate a few years back and thinking, we're halfway through the debate and all they've talked about is Social Security and Medicare. Did they raise the voter age to 65? Because some of us care about other things. Hello? People under 65 vote too. But the political candidates think, not so much. And so we don't care. We need to capture those seniors and the senior votes. So that's a big factor of who is likely to vote. In California, we have a lot of diversity. A lot of that diversity is concentrated among our younger people. So this is nothing to do with voting. This is just the ethnicity of Californians by age. And so when we talked about the population of California and race and ethnicity, we talked about overall statistics. But this is actually broken down by age. And one of the stark things that you notice is that seniors in California are not particularly diverse. You still have 78% whites among our senior population. So when we talk about old people voting in California, old people are white, that means that voters are old and white. And we'll see that in the next slide. 50% of our young 18 to 24-year-olds are Latino. So there's a growing diversity, and obviously this gets bigger and follows this trend of younger and younger people being more and more Latino. So the demographics of California are changing before our eyes as far as the electorate. And, we can certainly predict what's going to happen in a couple of decades when these groups are no longer voting. And, we have 3 or 4 more columns added to our voter turnout. It becomes a much more diverse electorate. So when we look at voter turnout, when we look at likely voters, these are the folks who are likely to vote, you can see overwhelmingly voters are white compared to the population of California, where they're not even the plurality. It's less than 40% of the overall population, and yet 72% white. Now, a lot of people will look at this slide and say, oh, white people vote more often than other people. Well, no, that's not always true. When we talk about who votes and who doesn't, it's much more predictive on age. And we see that old people in California vote, and old people in California are white. Therefore, voters in California are overwhelmingly white. Now, will Latino voters turn out in larger numbers? Yeah, I think so. As they age, as they see more candidates on the ballot that look like them, as they see more candidates who are their age, who are talking about issues that matter to them, I absolutely think they will vote. One advantage that white voters have over some other immigrant populations is that political efficacy, is that political socialization of parents believing that their vote is important and therefore teaching their kids to vote. As more diverse voters come to the polls and believe their votes are important, I think that starts to change in how you socialize the next generation. But again, if you come from a country, where voting does not matter because the political parties control issues or the dictator controls the election, your vote really doesn't matter. You're less likely to infuse your kids with this idea of voting is important. It's one of the reasons I also believe that we need to really get young people involved in local elections where the outcome of your next mayor could be decided by 10 or 15 votes. We've seen local elections over and over that have been decided by less than 20 people. It's hard to argue that your vote doesn't matter when your community is led by somebody who won by a small margin like that. So I think that one answer to the political efficacy, does your vote matter, is to concentrate less on the presidential elections and more on local elections, getting young people really involved in school board elections, really involved in city council elections, getting them involved in serving on commissions. Those things I think are really key to changing this slide and to getting more young people to vote and getting more diversity to the polls on election day.